All right, welcome back to another Coffee and Compliance. Really excited to have you all here today. Today, I'm joined by Erika Guerra of Marietta. She's the environmental director, and I'll let Erika, if you want to give a little bit on your background, but really excited to have you here today to talk about what is back to basics for environmental compliance. What are some of the basic components of environmental compliance programs, and even for the people running them, what does that mean? So thank you for being here today, Erika.
Thank you, Ryan, for inviting me. I have to confess that it's a little bit nerve-wracking to speak to this audience because everybody is super well versed on compliance and what they do, but thank you for the opportunity. So my role in the organization is, as you mentioned, I'm the environmental and land director for the Pacific Division, and that encompasses mainly California. And we are in charge of ensuring compliance for environmental and land use, land management in the region for all our business lines.
Yeah, and if you can describe a little bit about like the environmental areas that you cover and maybe the types of facilities that you and your team cover, just to kind of set the stage from what does it mean when you say an environmental program? What are all the different areas specific to your sites in your industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me first describe the business lines that are covered under these divisions. So we do have a number of ready-mix concrete facilities. Then we also have 2 cement plants, one in the north and one in the south. We have hot mix asphalt plants, and we have a paving business as well. And the core of our business is aggregate production. So we have mines that produce sand, stone, or gravel, depending on where they are and what market they serve. And as far as environmental compliance and what we cover throughout all those business lines. We cover the various media, so air, water, waste management, and a big piece of what we do is land use and land management that is at the core of our aggregate and cement production.
Yeah, so pretty varied lines of business operations in terms of like stormwater from a mine versus a hot mix asphalt plant. Can
Absolutely.
Be a little bit different.
Absolutely, with very different setups. I mean, the mines tend to be for in big operations, quarries, and with a processing plant. The cement plants are big industrial facilities, also with a quarry nearby, and then the rest of the businesses are kind of in a smaller footprint, typically in urban areas. So that presents a very different setup when it comes to compliance, interaction with communities, regulators, etc.
Yeah, and you have some that are like co-located, which just adds, I think, to the complexity of environmental challenges when you've got multiple operations on the same physical piece of property.
Yes, I will try not to use the term co-located because it does have implications sometimes on the regulations. So I will say that we have sites where we have more than one business line in the same at the same site.
Yeah, and when we've talked a bunch about kind of the basics of environmental compliance. What does it mean to you when you say like basic compliance for all your different facilities and when you're working with your team? What's the standard you set both for the environmental team but also on the production operations side?
Yeah, so I mean, basic compliance, I guess what everybody will understand is to ensure that there is compliance with all the laws and regulations that have that the site operates under, and that would be whatever most people will understand as basic compliance. To me, basic compliance goes a little bit beyond that. I mean, it's about being in compliance with all the permits that the facility has, all the applicable regulations, but it's really to be ingrained in the operation. and not just have like the environmental team, quote unquote, be responsible for environmental. Basic compliance is that when operational decisions are made, just as safety is taken into account for every single task and job that we have, that also environmental compliance and I guess environmental performance is also taken into that consideration, or whatever is going to be the task at hand. Call it investment, call it day-to-day operations, call it a closure of a facility. That all of our employees have environmental compliance in mind.
Yeah, and that can range from doing an inspection on a monthly basis for permit compliance all the way to reporting and like corrective actions and follow-up. Is there anything in particular that you see people struggle with in the basic compliance category? Do you find areas that are typically problematic or just harder for people to achieve or overcome?
Yeah, I really think it's going back to my definition of basic compliance, where people sometimes struggle is with competing priorities, and really think that compliance is something that where you will get a team or an agency to come and check, and not something that you have into your day-to-day thinking and activities. So I think instead of embedding, all the core processes and systems into a way of working, it's more about a behavioral and management expectation that needs to be developed. And I mean, all that it is, and we hear this all the time in business. I mean, it's about creating a culture. And I think that's probably the hardest thing. I think at the core, people understand that you need to abide by the law. I don't think there are any questions. And I'm a firm believer that every single person in an organization, they want to do their job correctly and right for the first time. But every day we are all faced with competing priorities at all the different levels during the workday and at all the different levels in the organization. So really the challenge is to create that culture that is really going to enable that behavior of having environmental as one of the core principles, the core values that the organization has in every single thing that they do. And I think that the way of doing that, I mean, it really starts with processes and systems, and they really have to be robust systems in order for people to feel comfortable that they can manage, and they can really, becomes natural to have that type of to enable that type of culture. I think it's in every organization having the right strategy, obviously, from a business perspective with environmental performance in mind. It's important having the right structure and people, but it really goes to, I mean, a lot of the work, at least in our department and within our organization, gets done at the processes and systems level to ensure that, I mean, if those three things are in place, that you have a good strategy, you have the right organization in place, then it will become natural to start implementing systems and procedures that will allow for that culture to start becoming one that is natural.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned something there around like the competing priorities, especially on the operation side, but I think that's true in innovation. How do you teach, train, enable both operations and environmental to think about that and prioritize? And how do you think about that in the context of environmental? Because for operations or productions, every day is a set of new challenges, and like you've got all these competing priorities. But how do you enable people to make the right decision faced with those competing priorities?
Yeah, so I think it starts with having a common value, and that common value is to be a good neighbor, a good operator, and a sustainable business. I mean, everybody these days talks about sustainability and environmental sustainability. I think we spend a lot of time on the environmental performance, and as of late, a lot of the social impact. But we forget that the business needs to be also sustainable in terms of providing value and be a profitable business. So I think starting from that those three key elements of sustainability of every business, and understanding that that's a shared value that that the group or the company has. It starts there. Once that everybody accepts that one cannot exist without the other, and that they need to be they need to be in a coordinated tandem effort when you do every work in the organization. But I think at a practical level, I think it's a combination of having indicators. I mean, from a management perspective, to having indicators that allow you to have and promote and monitor continuous improvement in the organization. I mean, it starts from the basic compliance, like, is the organization meeting the requirements that they're supposed to meet, and it goes all the way to making sure that there is always a way to make things better. So that concept of continuous improvement, and it can only be done with when you have those systems in place, that you have lagging and leading indicators. It's a way of making sure that the organization live and breathe those values in a way that is measurable and allows for anyone to be rewarded because they can be high performance, where and it's demonstrated by those leading indicators. But it's also can allows the organization to be proactive when there are gaps, and that sometimes when you look at those indicators, they're probably not the way that they're supposed to be, or those metrics. And that's why I think every organization needs to have also those lagging indicators. It's kind of a little bit of an approach of carrots and sticks on how to drive that culture.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite leading indicator that you really like, or?
I think no, I do not. I think it's a combination. It's I think it's very easy to fall into the trap when you're managing safety or environmental teams, to try to measure teams and measure people based on compliance only. There is a set of circumstances that can make a facility being always in compliance in a facility that is always struggling, and sometimes it's not fair to compare one facility to another just because they operate in different geographies. So I do not have the one. I think it's a combination, as I said, of leading and lagging indicators, and I think it's it's important to be able to go back on a regular basis, and sometimes too regular, to kind of a more overview of all those indicators and dashboards, and try to really get the full picture. I wouldn't choose one over another. I think it's a combination.
Yeah. And everybody on the webinar today was looking for the one to measure all performance, but no, I agree. It's usually a combination of things. When we go back to basics, when there's a need to really focus on basic compliance, when do you find that need? Is there a time when you're managing programs, even a time of the year? Is there any kind of specific time periods, or just from your indicators, that you realize that you need to move your program back to basics and really focus on the core compliance areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in a normal course of business, yes, definitely. I think we all take the end of the year and the beginning of the year to assess the level of performance that we have in our various businesses and areas. I particularly like to do most of the kind of the basic assessment in at the beginning of the year, because that allows for everybody to have a plan and enough time to execute for the remainder of the year. So to me, that is kind of like a nice pace in an environmental team to really get most of the site inspections, most of the really core basic, like, you know, the reporting, a lot of those basic functions of the department, to get them up front. So the remainder of the year is really to have plans for improvement and to close gaps and allow everybody to have time. That I like that cycle. I like that rhythm. But in other circumstances, as far as like what pushes you to go back to basics, I think, you know, in our case is we just went through a big business transaction. We were divested from another company, and Martin Marietta bought the assets or the business here. And because of that really makes you pause, because now there is, even that this is for the most part the same people operating the business and managing the business. It really gives you a pause, at least to me, of understanding what the new culture of the organization is, what are the values of that organization, and really reassess the performance that the team and the organization has had. So it's a new opportunity for questioning and relooking at things that I will say in a typical business cycle with a company, you really don't go back, because you just assume that those basics are in place. So that's a personal journey, and also a company journey that we're going through, and that is really putting us in a position to rethink and go back to basics.
Yeah, especially it's a unique time. If culture of the company, of the organization, is so critical for that, like competing priorities, decision making. When you
Absolutely.
transition companies, the culture is gonna always be slightly different. So you almost need a complete reset of like, how do we evaluate priorities? How do we think about this in this new culture? So
yeah,
interesting.
and I also think there is a huge opportunity to learn and relearn how others approach things. I think it's very interesting. I think for the most part, especially when you're going from one company to another in the same business line or the same industry, I will say that for the most part, the values are similar, the expectations are similar. But there's always a twist. There's always like something that makes that company and the culture of that company different and special from others. And I think just learning that and adapting to that really forces the question of, are we even like, having our basics covered? And so we can move into these new environment or this new culture that the team is expected to perform. So it is a huge learning opportunity.
Yeah, it's got to be cool for you too, just personally being able to see the insides of a whole new operation and how they do from a production, from an operation standpoint, from an environmental. It's got to be a great learning opportunity for you to get exposure, because you never see really behind the scenes how companies run things day to day until you're there.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that everybody, I will say, in this day and age, with especially during and post-COVID. We're all managing complexity, right? Things are not as simple as they were probably 20 years ago. But just learning and having that opportunity to know that others are going through the same challenges of managing that complexity, and that they really go back to their core values, their organization, and quite frankly, a strategy. It's fascinating. I mean, it's something that is engaging and fascinating at the same time. Challenging though. It's always challenging because I think just human nature is the fear of the unknown. But the good news is that there is so much more to gain by learning new people, getting to know new people, learning new styles, new ways of doing things, that it's very enriching for every single person in the organization, I think.
Yeah, and it definitely pushes you in new directions, but it's interesting, the managing complexities, like you look at from the outside looking in on organizations, you don't realize sometimes the chaos that every organization has and all the different competing challenges for time internally until you're in it. But yeah, it definitely stretches you in new directions. The final question I've got for you today is a little bit around that managing complexity. Is like, how do you enable both? You've got environmental and your business partner to operations production. How do you align them together to be on the same page around environmental compliance? How do you bring kind of two groups in some ways within the same organization together?
Yeah, I think it's about it starts with that basic understanding that we were talking about, that we all play a role, that environmental compliance and environmental performance is not just the job of a few that have that title in their jobs. I mean, it's really part of the culture and part of the organization. I think it starts there. But then, I mean, how do you integrate that into a day-to-day business? It's really making sure that all the functions, the geographies, the structures, and even to a certain extent, are the communities where we operate and the contractors that we have, that they really understand that, you know, this is environmental performance is embedded in the culture. I think I go back to my my answer as far as, like, you know, how do we do it at a practical level? And I think the only way to really all feel like a team is that you have shared goals, shared indicators, shared reports where everybody feels part of it, and not just having the one team in isolation doing all the reporting, having the goals, all the goals for environmental performance. It really needs to be shared, and it needs to be measured jointly, and it needs to be resolved as a team.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is training, I think too. I mean, I said a little while ago that I don't believe it. I mean, I'm a firm believer that everybody wants to do their job well, and I think a lot of it in our responsibility is making sure that people have the right training and the right tools to perform the job. So when I think about going back to basics, it's ensuring that everybody understands why we do things and how are we supposed to do them, and is going back to that training, and especially now that there's a lot. I mean, I think every single company is struggling with just hiring people and just, I mean, it's a very rough job market out there, just trying to employ folks, and in our industry, it's something that is very it's probably kind of front and center on how do we retain talent, how do we approach new employees, and I think training is a huge component of making sure that there is that shared responsibility, shared values, but there's also a way of attracting and retaining talent.
Yeah, beyond the strategy that we're going to have a sustainable business for both profitability and environmental, I think you're right. Like the process of how we do an inspection, how we do reporting, how we do training at a company, plus the system beneath it for, measuring performance, tracking, monitoring compliance. All those things create that framework that if you do have holes from like a hiring perspective, there's a really great system and process in place to kind of catch any gaps too.
Yeah, I couldn't say it any better. I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
We're almost at the end. Any final thoughts, any recommendations for people thinking about environmental programs, tips for them to remember when they're thinking about like, how do I shift back to basics? How do I incorporate this in the culture?
Yeah, no, I'm very humbled, as I said, to be invited to these coffee talk, and I would not like to be the one providing advice. I would instead just share my experience and say that even that when you do these for a long time, it's amazing. It's amazing to discover when you go back to those basics, all the things that's still left to do that one assumed that they were already done. And I think that's probably my biggest learning on this concept of going back to basics.
Yeah, always circling back. Well, you run a great program, Erika. We love working with you and your team. So no, you've got a great program and love your kind of systems and cultural values and how you hire and train people. So yeah, thank you very much for jumping on today and sharing some thoughts on how to structure environmental programs.
Yeah, no, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the tools that you provide for us to be able to have all these systems in place for an effective organization. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Erika. Thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great day.